Welcome back to Insight with your hosts Daniel Hayes and Andrew Blackmer. We're here discussing the situation in Syria here. Well, Andrew, so we've got the ground situation in Syria, but there seem to be some other surrounding issues, namely the international community.
Right, absolutely. The UN has put forth some resolutions, perhaps the idea of sanctions and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I haven't actually done any resolutions that I'm aware of.
Well, I mean, proposed
resolutions. They're chatting
right,
it out.
Right, absolutely. And as you can imagine, with these sorts of things, there's a lot of politics.
Yeah.
International politics in this case, right?
Yeah.
And China and Russia in particular, they have veto power on the Security Council. They're
Correct.
permanent members.
Yeah.
As the U.S. is, by the way. The U.S. is also
Yes, yeah, we are. The group of 15 countries that essentially can do or not do whatever they want to do in the UN.
And
what is
five are permanent members.
Yeah, 5 are permanent members. Guess which ones?
The old timers from 60 years ago, right?
The good old boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with regard to resolutions, they could condemn this, they could decide to take action, they could put troops on the ground. The problem with resolutions is that, one, everybody in the UN has to agree on it.
Right.
And two, as we've seen with resolutions regarding Israel and Palestine, they typically don't have a great effect.
Right.
So
the other idea is sanctions as well. And as we've seen in Iraq in the 1990s, and we're seeing right now with Iran, those aren't effective at limiting the governments that they're targeted at, and they oftentimes sort of hurt civilians and regular people in the process.
Right.
So there's also that problem as well.
Yeah, because, in my opinion, sanctions on this country is probably not going to do a whole lot. I think that the leader of Syria has done more to destroy his country economically than any sanctions we're going to impose.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's probably a situation like Gaddafi where, personally had $200 billion, but his citizens were living in poverty. I think Assad is quite obviously not concerned about the well-being of his people, so these economic sanctions, if we did impose them, will probably not make much of a dent.
Right, absolutely.
My concern is this. You got these folks on the Security Council, namely China and Russia, who are very reluctant to take action, any kind of action on this. And I think probably even more so than reluctant is to say that they are intentionally preventing any action from being taken because they are essentially allies with this country. And by allies with this country, it's clear that they're not allies with the people in general, but with this essentially ruthless dictator, Bashar Assad.
It's playing politics with this, right? Absolutely.
So what do they hope to get out of this after this sand settles?
Well, I would imagine an ally in that part of the world. Certainly, Syria is friends with Iran, and Iran has a lot of oil. Also has access to the Persian Gulf. It's an important trade route. So I think a lot of it is we don't want to upset Iran, and therefore we have to stick up for Iran's ally, Syria, as well.
So what does it say about Iran to continue to be allied with this regime here?
They take whatever friends they can get, is what it says about them. That is the truth about Iran, is they're isolated diplomatically. As much as the U.S. tries to say Iran is this big bad sort of demonic figure, they don't have a lot of friends. During the Iran-Iraq war, it was Syria, Libya, and North Korea that stuck up for them, and everybody else, including Russia, the Soviet Union, which was one of the rare moments in history when the Soviet Union and the United States were on the same side.
Yeah.
It ganged up on Iran during that and supported Iraq.
That sounds like a real group of bad boys. That's a motley crew if I've ever seen one.
Yeah. So, Iran, they've got a working relationship with Russia and China. and they have a long-standing relationship with Syria. They're trying to get a better relationship with Iraq, and they're trying to shore up relations in Afghanistan as well. So, as you can see, if you're Iran and you don't casually throw aside your allies,
Yeah.
on even if you may, we don't know obviously anybody's personal opinions, in Iran's higher, political figures like Ahmadinejad and the supreme leader Khamenei, but I think it's safe to assume that they're not going to just sort of casually throw aside a long-standing alliance that has helped them in the past.
So, I mean, what this says to me is that Iran's government being labeled as a theocracy is obviously a farce.
Right.
I mean, they are lining up with the most anti-Islamic
Yeah.
people they could possibly find. I mean, this is complete anathema to the religion itself.
Russia that has occupied Chechnya, which is Muslim, and China, which routinely oppresses the Uyghurs. Yes, they're not as. It's a lot of realpolitik.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty absurd. I mean, how do they have any sort of credibility after this?
Because the United States says so, right?
I don't know, man. I mean, that's a pretty poor position that Iran is putting itself in because, okay, maybe they can, maybe win out for a couple weeks or something, but that's going to, bring their country down in the long run,
when you're
right?
put between a rock and a hard place, you have to take desperate decisions, and they have a long, bad history with their borders. Iraq and Iran have had conflicts going back 50 years.
But that Iraqi government of old is done.
But it wasn't just Saddam. They had problems with the Iraqi monarchy. They had problems with the government before Saddam when they had a prime minister there. The Shah and Saddam had to come to a treaty regarding the Kurds because Iran and Iraq were paying each other's Kurds to attack the other, and they have a hard time with Afghanistan on the other side. In the 1990s, the Iranian ambassador to Afghanistan was assassinated, and they almost went to war. And the United States and some other international governments came in and said, "Hey, let's slow down here and not be too hasty." But that's why they're worried about things. They have not secure borders with friendly nations. Unlike the United States, we don't have any conflicts with Canada or Mexico, right?
So that's pretty good.
Yeah, you can imagine that.
We don't want all those ice hockey players coming in and beating everybody up.
Right, exactly. Or cheap T-shirts, right? From Mexico.
So, okay. So Iran's a player in this, looking like they're on the bad team.
Right.
Like another axis of evil sort of situation with China and Russia and
more
Libya and all these.
I think
guys.
It'd probably be better referred to as an axis of convenient friends.
Yeah. So what is to be done about Syria, right? America doesn't have a whole lot of political sway in the region, so you probably can't count on us like you usually could.
There are some lawmakers in Congress who want to allocate some money to buy arms and other supplies for Syrian rebels, ostensibly taking a side in the civil war.
Okay. So basically make them fight a war. But here's the thing. I always think just knock out the top guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Assad's controlling things, right? It's not really, it's not a real civil war in the traditional sense of the word that Americans understand.
Right.
It's a dictator who's got his finger on the trigger.
Right.
Take this guy out, and I think he'd probably be in better shape.
Well, that's part of it, but the people who fight for his side are people who perhaps legitimately believe that he fights for their own best interests. That being an Alawite, being somebody who is not just looking out for them to perhaps protect them from political reprisals, but also has made sure that they are looked after as far as jobs and education go. And so you can imagine they are very loyal. And it may not be the case that if you just take out Assad, that it'll just crumble. It may crumble, but those people who are under him might fight just as hard. and that's part of it. Not just to mention the fact that it sets pretty bad precedent to just sort of take somebody out. We're just
well,
gonna
like
do
we
it.
haven't done it before.
Well-
I mean, did we bomb Saddam's house? I mean, did we take out everybody we don't like?
Unofficially.
Unofficially. But I mean, the thing is, my point in this, and the suggestions that I'm I guess implying, is that the situation has changed, and I don't know how many people recognize that the situation has changed. I mean, this isn't like the country's intact, everything's okay, and if you do this, then these people have the power, or if you do that, then the other people have the power. Regardless of who supposedly wins, I don't think there can really be a winner in this civil war. The country is destroyed. You know what I'm saying? I'm just looking to prevent the loss of, another 70,000 lives.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, none of that is really necessary. You don't have to have another 1.5 million refugees.
Right.
I mean, at least from a humanitarian perspective, let's end the violence. I mean, the country, as it was maybe years ago, which was relatively stable, is done.
Right.
So what's to be done to at least stop the bleeding?
There may not be a valve to shut off in the international community. I mean, one, obviously, not everybody agrees to shut off the valve, well, for one. The other issue is we really don't know how a Assad-less future would play out. When you do these sorts of things, I mean, we took out Saddam.
We put in,
And, right. And it was very costly.
Yeah.
Things didn't exactly go as we wanted them to go. Same thing in Libya. We're still working out the kinks there, and it's been 2 years now, almost 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of dominoes that would fall in not exactly predictable fashion.
Yeah.
And you have to worry whether or not something worse would happen.
Okay.
The Tsar fell in 1917, and I would imagine a lot of people think what happened afterwards was probably pretty bad too. Right? So you have to take everything into account.
Well, hey, okay. Now, we're coming to the close of our show, and I'm going to move into just spitballing here. What if, hypothetically, Syria, this regime goes, it becomes usurped by a neighboring country?
Right.
What, just hypothetically, what do you think, how do you think that would go? What if Syria becomes part of Jordan or something?
You'd have to have a country that would have the means and capability to do that.
I think as far as their neighbors, Jordan's the best off.
Well, that's partially true. I mean, Jordan
But
has
they
its own
may not-
issues. Right? Jordan has issues with a native population that's 50% Palestinian born, and they don't exactly have all the rights as the other 50%.
Palestinians don't have Palestinian rights. They should be used to it by now.
Despite the fact that, by the way, the Queen of Jordan is Palestinian.
Right.
Herself, but I don't think that's a consolation prize they're happy with.
The Jackie Robinson made the mages.
Yeah.
Well, folks, that's just about all the time we have. I hope you've gained something from our discussion, and maybe we'll just get our acts together and we'll be able to help Syria and the rest of the region, which seems to be in pretty much disarray, which is disappointing. But hey, that's the way of the world as it is today. So, that's it for us. This has been a Dynamic Current Media production brought to you by Octet Solutions and Blissful Blessings Events. I'm your host, Daniel Hayes, with my co-host here,
Andrew Blackmer.
signing off.